So today, this is really a discussion for extension officers and other trusted advisors to share ideas and learn from each other about how we can better communicate those science outcomes to the growers and what the challenges are. So welcome everybody. It's going to be another exciting webinar and I look forward to participating. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgina. So now we're going to ask Aaron Davis, Senior Research Officer at James Cook University, to give us a quick recap of the session last week. So thank you, Diana. And Aaron, if you could please share your screen.
Thanks, Jeanette. Hopefully that's happening now. Oops.
Hasn't come up yet.
Well, of course, it worked fine in the
practice. It always does,
practice,
doesn't it?
Yes.
The joys of technology.
Yes.
So sharing, the share screen button is in the middle of the bottom of the black Zoom screen.
Oh, geez, the entire, give me one sec.
While Aaron's working out to share his screen, I encourage you all to have a bit of a quiet think about what are some of the things that are working really well for you in communicating your messages, the science messages to farmers, and maybe jot a few thoughts down because that's some of the conversations we'll have when we get into chat rooms. Excellent. Thank you, Aaron.
Okay, so that has popped up now, Jeanette, has it?
It has popped up now.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's all right.
So after a slight technical glitch, everyone, good morning. I'm just going to give a very quick recap of last week's, I guess, science presentation, just to provide a little bit of background to the critical topic that we'll be discussing today about how we communicate reef water quality scientists. So last week, we spoke about water quality science, the state of water quality science in the Great Barrier Reef catchment continuum. So if we revisit that catchment to reef conceptual model I talked about last week, I spoke about a lot of the water quality issues associated with nutrients, sediments, and pesticide loss at the sort of catchment and marine scales in the Great Barrier Reef. So the delivery of these water quality parameters, the dominant land uses, they're real sort of, they're different, often quite different zones or areas of impact on the different ecosystems of the Great Barrier Reef. And Kev McCosker, he sort of concentrated more at the scale here of the paddock. So I provided a quick overview of the water quality issues. Kev gave, I think, a really good succinct summary of the water quality management practices at the paddock scale and the farm scale that we can use to try and address some of those issues. So it probably highlighted that there's a lot of science, there's a lot of information out there. There were some really fantastic and interesting follow-up questions from the audience of this webinar. And they covered a really diverse range of topics too. So questions around management practices, questions around what are the actual impacts and how do we see them. And I think it really, underlines the challenges we currently face as scientists, farmers and extension staff, policy people on how we condense what's a really diverse, complex topic into sort of a form of information that's sort of meaningful and relevant to everyone, particularly the farmers on the coalface of managing water quality, but also the scientists, the extension staff and the government and policy people. So I'll probably leave it at that, Jeanette.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Aaron, for the recap. So if you can stop sharing your screen, that's great, thank you. If people would like to turn their videos off, it might help with the bandwidth for some people and also maybe a bit of, I know there's a lot of talk about Zoom fatigue with lots of people on the screen. So if we just turn those off for the moment, that's great. We'll turn them back on when we get into the breakout rooms. So now I'd like to introduce Carolyn Carruthers, who's the Principal Communications Officer with the Office of the Great Barrier Reef, Department of Environment and Science. Carolyn has a background in newspaper journalism and more than 20 years communication experience. She became aware of the need to more effectively communicate the science when she began working on reef water quality improvement programs. Carolyn has been collaborating with a range of partners in recent years and using different approaches to help communicate complex matters to landholders. So I'll hand over to Carolyn, who's going to share her screen and do her presentation.
Hey, hopefully just, okay, can you see it now?
Yes, I can. Excellent. Thanks, Carolyn.
Great. Technology worked for me. That is unusual. Thanks, everyone. I'd just like to firstly acknowledge the traditional owners on whose land we're all gathering today, and their elders past, present and future. Today, I'm going to talk to you about what the science tells us is the best way to communicate the science. I'm going to take you through some of the approaches and the way we tackle this, and some of the material we've developed. And then you're going to hear from Ellie Carter, who'll give you some on-ground experiences. Firstly, I'd just like to look at what you guys said, and I really appreciate that you answered the questions. It was really interesting to read through what you'd experienced, what you found worked. And you'll see there that I've sort of summarised some of the key things that you said. Face-to-face, relevancy to audience, customised to your local community, keep it simple and build relationships. Interesting to me was that many of you also mentioned the data was really important, and that's often in a science communication world we don't rely too heavily on the data, but I think in particular this audience, landholders, that's obviously something that is quite important to them. What we know works generally from a science communication perspective, and many of these things were issues you'd already identified. You know, you need to understand and connect with your audience, have some simple messages. Telling stories is really critical. That's how people will engage with your message. Using trusted spokespeople and visuals. And I'm going to go through each of these points in a little bit more detail. So when it comes to your audience, you really need to just think about what they want to know. What do they already know? What do they need to know? How do they like to be communicated with? And if you can help them solve a problem or create an opportunity for them, as many of your extension officers, as we saw in the poll, and you'll know your audience pretty well and you'll know what they value. So just think about how they would like to receive that information. You know, some people will want all the information, all the data. They'll want to go through it with you in detail. Others might just want a broad brush summary. They might want to see something on ground. So it's just thinking about what works best for the people you're talking to, and providing a local context can really help. You know, what's it mean in that region, that area? What else is going, and think about what else is going on for those people. Simple messages. We're all time poor and overloaded with information. Everyone thought COVID might make our world a little quieter. I think it's got busier for many people. So it's just simplifying your messages, thinking about perhaps the one or two things you want people to take away, and keeping that language simple if you can. So fairly short, fairly precise, don't use technical terms, but at the same time, acknowledging that, you know, farming terms, your audience knows that stuff, so it's perfectly appropriate to use that. And I guess just looking again at what you guys said, thinking about the data, you know, would having all those facts and figures be available or be useful to your audience? You know, and we've seen some of that in some of the projects where we have some local monitoring on particular farms or in a particular subcatchment. where working with those farmers and showing them the data really does resonate with them. Telling stories. Stories just, they really capture people's imaginations. They give you a way to put sometimes quite technical concepts into an easy to understand way. And you know, we all relate when we hear how other people have dealt with an opportunity, and particularly landholders. If you can get a landholder to tell their story, and that's I guess where case studies and videos can work really well, when people can, or even, you know, in person at your field days, having someone tell their story about why they did something, what influenced them to do it, and what they found out. Would they do it again? And would they change it? This photo is Tony Rossi, a sugarcane farmer up in the wet tropics. And I just want to read you a story, or just a couple of lines from a story they helped us tell in a video. And so this is a quote. "I think back to my uncle and father and how they did a lot of bulldozing, pushed a lot of trees over, built a lot of wetlands and swamp, turned it all into cane land. They were men of their time and they were doing what was right. And we're men of our time and the game has changed. The expectations of farming have changed. We're still about production, but we see things like establishing wetlands and planting trees as the way to go. So we're very proud of what we do, and we're very proud of what our fathers and uncles did, because what they were doing was right at the time." I just think that's a really lovely example of a story, building emotion, acknowledging what's happened previously, but also why they're doing things. And I will show you a brief snippet of a video at the end of this presentation. So this photo again, we have Tony with a couple of modelers, Jill McCloskey and Louise Haitley, and we brought these people together to create some videos. So this is around using trusted spokespeople. Rather than just having a scientist, we brought the scientists and the farmers together and had them interact and ask some questions and share information with each other to try and get that message out in some different ways. So yeah, think about who might be a trusted spokesperson in your area. Maybe it's another farmer, maybe it's an agronomist, maybe it's a regional body rep. And you also have scientists. You may have some local scientists who can really communicate well, and you know, landholders often will like to have a scientist there because they can ask the tricky questions that we can't always answer. Visuals are really important. You know, a lot of people, visuals will help them recall information, and it also forces you to simplify your information. So in thinking about graphics, just think about what are the most important points to get across. How can you really simply represent them? Hopefully, this is one of the examples we have from our sediment series. And it's really just to show that when you have rain falling on land with minimal ground cover or erosion, and it's just a really simple way to show the concept of sediment will run off that land and then ultimately get out to the reef. And we use this in a video that's about reducing soil loss by managing your erosion and improving your ground cover. Evaluate. At the end of the day, if you get a chance to just ask a couple of questions of the people you've been talking to or communicating with, you know, did this give you the information you needed? Was there anything I didn't cover? Will they be able to act on what you're saying? Just if you can get some feedback each time, then next time you go to communicate with a similar audience, you'll be able to maybe provide a bit more information that they need. So as I said, the Queensland Government and the Australian Government have been trying to focus on improving our science communication in the last couple of years. We actually employed a science communication contractor company last year or the year before to help us develop a range of material in recognition that we needed to try some different approaches. And so what we did was we developed some videos, and that was the ones I was talking about. I'll show you an example in a moment. We did some podcasts, which have a range of scientists and landholders and extension officers talking about their experiences and going into a bit more depth. And then we have some written explainers that are all provide a lot more detail. All of this content is available on the Reef 2050 Water Quality Improvement Plan website, which is the website that's there, and we'll send that out post the event. And also, in recognition of that desire for more data, more information, we do provide more detailed information as well on that same website. So we have our report card that comes out annually. Since last year, that's been an interactive report card, so you can delve down into the detail. You can go regionally, you can go industry, you can go indicator, and you can get all the data. And then I'm just going to show you, hopefully, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I don't obviously have time to go through this in any detail, but as part of our science contract, they developed up some tip sheets, or a tip sheet for us on creating little sort of 30 to 60-second videos, just some information about kind of what to do in terms of having a tripod if you can, and using a microphone, and kind of a bit of a recipe, a cheat sheet for how to create a nice little video. So I will share that tip sheet with you after this event. And hopefully now you will be able to see and hear this video. I won't play the whole thing, but I'll just play a little bit of it.
There's so many things that people use modelling daily for, and they probably don't think anything of it.
Modelling doesn't always excite farmers too much. Farmers like things that are real and measurable. If there's cobwebs in the lawn, you won't have rain that day. The sky, you know you're going to get rain. Flying ants swarm on the river, and you can't see the mountain, you know it's going to rain.
The reason we do modelling is because it's too expensive, time and money, to monitor everywhere. So we use modelling to give people an understanding of what their practices on farm, or how that might be contributing to pollutant runoff to the Great Barrier Reef.
Okay, and I will leave it there. We will play the videos in the break for people who want to see them, and they're also on our Reef 2050 Water Quality Improvement Plan website. Okay. Are you there, Jeanette?
Sorry, I didn't turn myself off mute. Technology. Thank you very much, Carolyn, for that presentation. Some really good tips and thoughts through there, and we've got some good questions for you to have a look at in the chat box while we move on to hearing from Ellie. You can have a think about those. So Ellie Carter is going to give us a bit of an overview of her experience working on the ground in extension. Ellie was jointly awarded the Reef Extension Champion Award in 2019 in recognition for her passion for the agricultural industry. Originating from the UK before commencing her tertiary studies in Victoria, she has worked on outback Queensland on cattle stations. She is acutely aware of the pressures facing agricultural operators seeking to find the balance between productivity and long-term viability with the interests of our global environment at heart. So Ellie, if you could please share your screen, we'll hand over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Jeanette. We'll see how we go here.
That's looking like it's working. Good.
Rightio. We've got that?
Yes, we're away. Thanks, Ellie.
Awesome. All right, so I suppose as Jeanette said, I'm not here trying to teach anyone how to suck eggs. There's plenty of people on here that've got more extension experience than me. But yeah, also I suppose I get a lot of, oh, who's this Pommy Sheila? You know, go out on properties and people say, who's this Pommy Sheila? Rah, rah, rah. But I think it's all about the person that you are. as Jeanette said, I have got a bit of practical experience on properties and that sort of thing, and been around different places in Australia and learnt a few different things as I've gone along. But it's more to do with who you are as a person and how you want to relate to other people and help them in their journey. So I suppose the three sort of elements that I mainly work on in my approach is empathy, honesty, and simple direct language. So your empathy is, you know, the situation that they're in. They might not be able to change something the next day. They might not be able to change it within a year, but it's over time. So you got to expect that. They might say, oh, I've got this on, this or that on, I'm very stressed about this. You can't go in there and then expect things to change straight away and expect them to get on board with completely changing a practice that they've done the same way for 40 years. So it's about relating to them as a person. And I hope, I suppose, in any relationship that you have in your life, that's an important factor. The next sort of thing that I really try and push is honesty. Like, oh, nah, sorry, mate, I don't know that. I'm not sure. I don't know what that weed is. I don't know what that bit of grass is. I'll go back to the office. I'll have a bit of a look and a bit of a sniff around, see what I can find, and I'll get back to you on that. And that's the best way. I reckon people in the rural sector have a very good bullshit radar, and if you're going to try and bloody pull the wool over their eyes, they're going to sniff it out pretty quick. So it's just all about honesty and following up afterwards. Simple direct language, just keep it simple. We don't need to use long words. We don't need to make anything more complicated than it has to be. Like even just as simple as you know, forage budgeting, working out how much grass you've got, how many cattle you've got, how much they're eating, and what have we got left over, and therefore how long is it going to last us. It's a simple step-by-step process. We don't need to overcomplicate things. This is just all things that are working for me. So yeah, these are my little tips that I've written up. Active listening. Sometimes I might just go out to a property and sit in the ute and drive around, and we might talk about everything under the sun. It might be only a certain part of the day that we actually talk about what I'm there to talk about, but you're building that relationship. You're figuring out, you're listening sort of underneath it all. You're figuring out what's actually making them tick and what they've got going on in their life, and therefore you can figure out what's the best approach for them and what sort of resources that you've got that might suit them. Yeah, don't overwhelm with science and figures. I tend to keep things pretty simple. And yeah, I think there was a question there before that was about how do you relate, you know, how do you make the reef data relatable? Well, you know, we have producers out 5 hours away down in Wandoan from the coast. They're saying, how does our water affect the reef? Well, I say, well, it's all about your local environment and what you can do to improve that. So it's about your property and what you're doing to improve your property. So they don't need to necessarily completely stress about the reef, but it's about improving their local area and their environment and improving their productivity and their property as well. Don't be a salesperson. Focusing on develop a relationship based on trust. So you don't want to be forcing anything down their neck. That's pretty straightforward, and that's why NRM groups are so good, because it's impartial information. We're not trying to push anything onto people. Landholders have enough pressure. Pressures don't add to it. Yeah, I think I suppose landholders are always portrayed in the news and stuff of not really knowing what they're doing and here, there, and everywhere. Well, I think they're probably the smartest fellas in business. They've got to know about the environment. They've got to be nearly a vet. They've got to know about forage budgeting. They've got to have a very good sound business knowledge. There's just so many factors into a business to keep it afloat, and there's so many external factors on their business that we don't need to be adding any more pressure to what they're doing. I just try and keep it pretty casual. Yeah. Understand where people are coming from, even if your perspective is at odds with theirs. Like, yeah, I mean, I've been out and about, you get a lot of the greeny sort of comments and that sort of thing, and I don't mind. All I'm out there to do is to help them along and support them. And eventually, it's every time you might have a contact with that person, it might be 1% every time. Eventually, they might change the way that they manage their place and change their opinions. But it's just not forcing. It's just listening and not feeling so passionately about something that you want to jump down someone's neck. And yeah, adapt your approach. You've got some people that you can openly talk to about anything under the sun, and then you've got some people that you've just got to slowly try and catch the monkey sort of thing. Hope that's pretty straightforward. Talking riddles a lot, probably. What's worked for me? Continue to learn and upskill for the benefit of your landholder. Like, you're not expected to know everything. But as I said before, it's about being honest and saying, sorry, mate, I'm not sure about that one, I'll get back to you. But the more knowledge that you know, the sort of more skill that they feel that you've got behind you as you're talking. And I think the practical knowledge on ground is a big thing. I'm not going to tell everyone to go out and work on a property for 2 years, but I think just knowing what they go through on a day-to-day basis is a big thing. Focus on long-term and the positives, which I've said before, it might not be 1% every time, but it might be 0.02% every time you go out there, and it's just an ongoing basis. Don't add to the pressure. I think we've already said that. Have the support of excellent resources to leave with them to consider. We do have a great comms team here at FBA, and we work very, very closely with them, and we're pretty lucky to, whatever we sort of think up about what landholders might need, the comms team seem to make it happen. So there's a little plug for Ebony and Johanna. And a big thing for me is advocating for the landholder. Like, we might have meetings here at FBA and we might be changing our approach or doing something different, and I'll try and sort of play the devil's advocate a bit, not the devil's, well, the landholder's advocate, but you know, talk about the practicalities of actually applying that, and whether landholders will use that, or whether they'll balk a bit at it, and whether it might turn people away. Oh yeah, a bit of a plug for our pasture budgeting guide. This comes back to that very simple, easy approach to forage budgeting. So you can go down, so my big thing is just trying to keep things simple. So you can go down the route of a step-by-step approach, cutting, measuring, weighing grass. But this tool that we had produced through FBA has been a bit of a lifesaver, and we've actually got a lot more people requesting them and wanting to do forage budgeting, because it's got photos. You don't necessarily need to go and cut and weigh grass. The photos are very simple. You find out what land type you're on. You go to that section in the book, you flick through and you go, okay, I might be between these two photos. So we've got a rough estimate of how much grass is there. We'll take a bit out for non-edible species and that sort of thing. Then we just do a rough estimate of how many cattle we've got and what they're eating. Take that out, and then it's as simple as what we've got left and how long it's going to last us. Because my big thing is to try and get more and more landholders to be doing this at the end of the wet season, so they can sell cattle early when they're fat and they're getting good prices, and then we're not having a panic sale and we're not running out of grass and constantly overgrazing country. So this is a big positive guide that the comms team have helped us produce. So yeah, there's just a bit of info there on the screen about it. And so yeah, I suppose it's that the age-old saying about giving a man a fish and teaching a man to fish. It's that ongoing thing that they should, you know, you're teaching skills, ongoing skills. So I don't know if that was 10 minutes, but yeah, pretty much wrapped up. But yeah, I'm hoping I'll get a few questions anyway.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ellie. And if you can stop sharing your screen. What we'll do is we'll go to Carolyn first to answer some of the questions that have been put up for her, and then we'll come back to you, Ellie. So if you all go to speaker view, and I'll ask Carolyn to answer some of those questions that have been popped up.
Okay, I'm just having a little look here. So one of the things that comes through a couple of times, I guess, is that monitoring versus modelling question. So, you know, someone said monitoring trumps modelling data, and someone else has said find a way to answer the question as it might in. And I guess this also links in with the comment about engaging producers and collecting data. Yes, we all know, and it's come out in both our presentations, that if you can localise it and show people that what is happening on their land is having an impact on the local waterway, that is always going to be the ultimate way of communicating and engaging with someone. Unfortunately, the cost of doing that in terms of equipment and time is just so prohibitive. And one of the things the Queensland government has tried to do is get some cheaper monitoring sensors, but it's a really challenging thing to do. To get sensors that are really accurate, that are cheap, is not an easy thing to do. So yes, if you can do that, great. But where we can't is where we do have to use modelling and try and, I guess, use the local results that you do have to explain that to growers. You're not always going to win people over, and we understand that and accept that, but we have to work within the parameters that we have. One of the other questions there was about how do we work with growers who don't see the problems with water quality in the Great Barrier Reef. I think, again, that's the point that Ellie was making. Talk about your local waterways, and ultimately those flow to the reef, but it's really about working with farmers and looking at their local waterways. Someone else there also asked about why focus on negatives like pollutants to reef rather than minimising losses or improving profitability. We do take that approach as well. We realise it's really important to try and have a win-win situation where, and some of the projects we've done, particularly some of our nitrogen reduction projects, have shown that where farmers match the nitrogen needs to their crops, they will have savings on, their purchase of nitrogen. They have improved productivity and less runoff. So we certainly do try and approach things from that aspect wherever we can. One of the other questions, I think, was, there was something about the good news stories. Why only focus on the bad? We certainly don't focus on the bad. With our report card, yes, a lot of those grades are Ds. We have to report to those targets. But what we try and do is provide all the case studies, the highlights. So on that interactive report card, yes, we report the grade, but then we say what's been done, to what have been some of the success stories, the gullies that have been remediated or the less tons of nitrogen that have been applied. And we have links to all those projects that have delivered those improvements. And then we have case studies, whether that's videos or written. So we do try and get the good landholders' voice out there, explaining why they've done and what the benefits of that have been. I think that probably covers most points that were raised for me.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. We may have some more questions too after we've been in the breakout rooms that we can throw around. So thank you for that. Ellie, if you would like to turn your microphone on now and you can answer there. I think there's a couple of questions there for you as well.
Yeah, let's have a gander here. Any tips on building rapport and trust with producers? I think it comes back to that, if you say you're going to deliver something, you deliver it. If you say you're going back to the office if you don't know about something, you do that and you follow up. And then, in a period of time later, you might give them a quick call to see how they're going with whatever you gave to them. I think it's just about listening to them, and it's about asking them what they want and what they're thinking of doing and working along with them. It's just like, I suppose, any relationship in life, and just reading the situation, not being threatening, not sort of pushing any of the, I think sometimes people can get scared easily when we talk about science and sediment and data and rah from the get-go. It's just about reading the situation and building that trust the get-go, and yeah, delivering when you say you're going to deliver. What resources work well? I suppose, yeah, I talked about that that forage budgeting guide. That's worked really well for us. We've got a few good paper-based. We've got weed books. We've got a good erosion control book by John Day and Bob Shepherd that works really well for us. It's got good photos in it. So anything that we're trying to explain, to say we're out in a erosion site, and yeah, just having the diagram there, because sometimes it's like, oh, we'll whack this bank in, we'll have then a long level sill to let the water come out on the ridge line, and sometimes, you know, it might be a bit confusing, but yeah, if you've got a book like that there, you can literally show it straight away. So I think it's about having good practical, just yeah, books or something like that, so you can have them out in the paddock, because I know videos and stuff are good, but like actually having that technical yeah, product out in the paddock is very useful, I've found anyway. I don't think I've got any more questions here.
I think, Ellie, there's been one question about, is print content best? So would you like to just comment around a bit more around that print versus online content?
Oh, well, I just find from my personal experience that a lot of places I'm out in the paddock in the middle of nowhere, I've got no service or anything. So, and it's really when I'm trying to explain a design of something or the forage budgeting, just having those, like a flick through guide that's very simple. And Carolyn was talking about diagrams and pictures and that, like really the diagrams and stuff really help to explain what we're talking about. So that's why I find the print works well. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes going back to the old fashioned way is the best way to go.
So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Ellie. And once again, if there's any questions that pop up that you would like to throw at Ellie after you've been in the breakout rooms, please put them in the chat box and we can catch up on them later. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a 5-minute break, and Carolyn is going to play her video while we have the break. And while we do that, Diana and I are going to make sure that the breakout rooms are set up. So when we come back, we'll explain what you're going to do in the breakout rooms and send you off. So if anyone would like to head off to the bathroom, grab a cup of coffee, cup of tea, glass of water, now's the opportunity. And Carolyn, I'll hand over to you to share your screen and put the video on while we have the break. So back in 5 minutes, everybody.
Okay, thanks. Oh, hold on. Sorry, will take me a sec to get that. Try again. Screen, where is, here we go. Okay, put it in full screen. All right.
There's so many things that people use modelling daily for, and they probably don't think anything of it.
Modelling doesn't always excite farmers too much. Farmers like things that are real and measurable. If there's cobwebs in the lawn, you won't have rain that day. The sky, you know you're going to get rain. Flying ants swarm on the river, and you can't see the mountain, you know it's going to rain.
The reason we do modelling is because it's too expensive, time and money, to monitor everywhere. So we use modelling to give people an understanding of what their practices on farm or how that might be contributing to pollutant runoff to the Great Barrier Reef.
We collect as much data as we can from as many places as we can across the landscape. Let's just say that the water quality monitoring samples are a bunch of black dots on a page. These bunch of dots on a page don't really look like anything, but once you actually join the dots together and make a picture, modelling is drawing those dots together.
Anything that happens in this little valley will end up getting picked up in the end of the river catchment. It helps people focus on what the special issues are for their catchment. From what I know of farmers, they'll cop something if they think it's fair enough. So I guess farmers should be really quite happy with this end of catchment monitoring now, because it's generally a good news story. There's been so much progress made.
When we first started, maybe 10 years ago, there were 20 sites maybe, and we're up now into the 60 and 70 number of sites.
It was largely seen as a bit of a play around and not accurate. The water monitoring that happens in the river now is very technical, so we can really believe it. Do farmers trust scientists? I think they do. If they work with them, if the data stacks up and is done properly, they'll trust it for sure. So now it's trying to minimise nutrient runoff, being sensible about your pesticides application. And what I've seen of the figures is really reassuring that people are moving in the right direction. We're lucky we live on the river. Being river folk has really influenced us. We want to have as little impact on the environment as possible while still being highly productive farmers. And one of the really great things that's happened all the up the Queensland eastern coast is that all the major catchments have end of water loads monitoring now. Everyone lives in a catchment, whether you're in a city, country, farm, whatever.
So you can think of when the rainfall hits the landscape, it's going to fall into a catchment. That's basically an area that catches water and then will eventually flow either across the landscape or percolate down through the soil profile and eventually end up draining into the Great Barrier Reef.
We can give people an understanding of what their practices on farm or how that might be contributing to pollutant runoff to the Great Barrier Reef. And we're able to show people that if they switch from practice X to practice Y, that can actually have lesser pollutant runoff to the reef, but it might still generate the same yield from their sugarcane.
And we want farmers to be able to produce the same yield.
I think a lot more farmers need to see those figures. Tony and I are involved in land care, so we do see these figures regularly. And as you see the water monitoring figures, they're really interesting because not only are you getting regular background results, you do see in the storm or the flood events, the first runs, that's often when the loadings of pesticides or nutrients are at their highest. And having that fed back to a farmer really can explain how things are leaving his farm. And on 350 days of the year, there's probably nothing leaving his farm, but understanding those events is very important.
A lot of people use the reef recreationally. Louise and I go hiking through the rainforest. I think we'd all like to see the land managed in a really sustainable way so that we can reduce our impact on the health of the reef.
Everyone always says they should do something about it. We are they. This is acting locally, thinking globally. That's where you can make the change in your community and stop just whinging about it. Just get out there and do it and you'll feel good.
Thank you for sharing those videos, Carolyn. I think our 5 minutes is now up. We have noticed we have lost a couple of people, but what we're going to do now is we're going to go to breakout rooms. So if we can go, what we'll do, Diana, if you could share your screen so we can go through the questions in the breakout groups, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So we'll go to a breakout group where you'll have a facilitator in the breakout group. We have more facilitators than we need. So if we have two of you that we've asked to facilitate in the same room, you can decide who's going to take the lead role for us. Thank you. So while you're in your breakout groups, and you'll have 15 minutes, so you can introduce yourselves to each other, have a chat about these questions. And we will pop the questions up in the room after a few minutes so that you can you don't have to remember what they are. So the questions are, in your role when you communicate science, what approaches are working well? So thinking about what you are currently doing, what's working really well for you that you can share with the other people in your group? And what are some of the challenges that you face while you are doing that extension work with the farmers. Sorry, I had a chat pop up, which is, sorry, just slightly distracted me. So after 15 minutes, the facilitator is going to record some of those things, and I'll be asking some of the facilitators to report back some of the discussion that you've had on each of those questions in the breakout rooms. So we'll send you off for 15 minutes. When a little sign pops up on your screen that says, would you like to join the breakout group? Can you please select yes, that you're happy to join the breakout group? Turn your videos on and your microphones on and enjoy having a chat with one another about what's working well and what are the challenges for you when you communicate science to the farmers you work with. All right, Diana, you can stop sharing your screen, and if you could please send people off to have a chat, that would be great. We'll see you all back in 15 minutes. Welcome back, everybody.
That was very quick.
It was very quick. We got through the first question, not necessarily the second question.
Okay, so we need more time. It sounds like is one of the learnings for this.
Yeah,
and we will have, so we'll allow a little bit more time for the next question when you get back together. So we'd like to hear from some of the groups about what it was you talked about. So I'm going to ask the group 1, 2 and 3 to give us a quick feedback on what were some of the things they talked about what was working well for them. And then we'll go on to group 4, 5 and 7 to see if they got to the question about what are some of the challenges and share some of those. So the first group will be the group that Kate Armstrong was in. So Kate, are you the facilitator in that group, or would somebody else like to pop up and share with us what you talked about?
Carla and I were in it together, but she dropped out, so I became the facilitator for that group. So both questions, Jeanette, or just the one?
Just the first question. If you can just share some of the things that were working well. Thanks, Kate.
Yep. So we chatted about what worked well. Yeah, kind of a lot of what had already been talked about, but yeah, keeping it relevant and keeping it local when we're engaging with our growers / graziers, and especially relating it to like a grower or grazier's individual business. So trying sometimes not to look too broad scale, but how the science or the practices are relevant to them and their business. And how sometimes it is important and works well incorporating the science with, so I guess it's kind of the same, incorporating science with their farm management and agronomy. So, you know, hand in hand kind of situation. But then we kind of discussed how it can be different in your role. Like I work at a prod service in Mossman where farmers are acutely aware of the reef. It's right on their doorstep. You really don't need to talk too much about the like very technical reef science side of it. So working from the agronomic side actually works kind of better in my situation, but then for someone who works maybe like at SRA or DAF or something where it is a bit more sciencey, there's more freedom in that because that's the growers or graziers kind of, not expectation, but yeah, bringing them together. And then I also shared just having some simple handy resources has worked well for me. You know, I have this like extension toolkit that I just made myself, like laminating a bunch of resources with graphs or pictures or, you know, the nitrogen cycle, things like that. And I just keep that with me wherever I go. And it's really easy to whip out if a grower has a question. And sometimes, yeah, they get surprised by how simple things can be when we're talking about their farm stuff. Yeah, but definitely we all agreed that keeping it relevant, local, relating it to them, and yeah, that one-on-one stuff works really well.
Great. Excellent. Thanks, Kate, for your good summary on what you talked about. Jean, over to you. Can you share some of what I hear your group didn't get to question 2, but if you could share some of the things that you talked about for question 1, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so after we introduced ourselves and we had a mixture of people from the wet tropics and Mary River, Burnett Mary terrain, I think one of the key things that we talked about was farm services, and on this we were really looking at the wet tropics and communications, and the fact that the farm shed meetings have been a really great way of engaging local neighbourhoods and communities together. And Maria shared that in the Tully area, because it is a small group, it's trust in the neighbourhood with the data. So this was very much about sharing water quality data and relating it to the rainfall and explaining what's going on in their catchments. And they had the same experience in the Johnston with a different group, Sky advised, that they sort of talked about the fact that once they moved to smaller groups again, they got growers engaged more in the process, and people who weren't speaking up then started to speak up. So that size and trust and relationships were important. And that, I think, in terms of keeping it simple, is really, really important going forward. They also talked about some of the communications in the videos and the social groups and the local TV campaign. But it was about, again, bringing that message of small farming communities coming together and engaging in a debate and a discussion, so they build up their knowledge and their sense of community and have a conversation about what's going on. And that in itself built up a more engaged community over time.
Great, thanks, Jean. It's really interesting, isn't it, how the power of small groups and bringing people together where you've got that strong level of trust can create great change. But it, obviously can be more expensive because of the time that and input that people need to put in, but very effective way to get change. Thank you, Jean. Tracy Schultz, in group 3, are you able to share a couple of the things that your group talked about?
Yeah, very similar themes to the other 2 groups, where of what seems to work well. So as I'm looking down sort of the notes that I've taken, the thing that pops out to me is that every single one of the approaches that we talked about were face-to-face approaches. Where it was one-on-one interactions, be it in small groups. Through workshops, soil workshops came through really clearly in our group as being, an approach that really works well, or peer-to-peer groups. And certainly Ellie's comments around, that planting that seed and, teaching someone to fish, that it's enabling people to make their own decisions. And another comment that came through, which I thought was a really good one, was that sort of reflected through both the presentations and earlier comments, is around that whole of systems approach, that you need to understand, where your approach and what you're hoping to achieve fits within the whole farmer's context, and, and what he needs to achieve on his farm. So yeah, that was what came through for us.
Great, thank you. I'll remember, I always think when I'm going out working with farmers, if we seek to understand before being understood, which is quite reflected in what you were talking about. Yeah. So thank you for that. So we'll move on to question 2, which was around the challenges. So I'm hoping that some of the groups did get to question 2, and we will allow a bit more time in the breakout room next time. So Kathy, in group 4, are you able to share with some of the things that your group talked about around challenges?
Yes, absolutely. And we did get onto this question. So, so one of the first ones we discussed was around building relationships with growers in the time and the time that we were funded in projects. So being able to develop a relationship doesn't always match sometimes our short funding timeframes, and the depth and breadth of practice change that's expected. So, for example, for a short project like a 12 or 2 year 12-month or 2 year project. So some of those, practices, they don't change overnight. Some of them can be quite costly. It takes time to build relationships with producers, and producers, it's not always producers' priorities to fit within our project priority timeframes. It might be on their longer term plan, but it doesn't always fit our project priorities for what we need to achieve for practice change. So it's always a challenge. The other challenges with communicating with producers is other impacts that affects them in terms of their business or themselves. So droughts, floods, pandemics, as we've experienced recently. Also things around financial pressures, and growers are being bombarded from all sorts of directions, not just from extension staff or project staff. I'm just flicking through the rest of these. yeah, I think that was the main things that we discussed, that we got
Great.
through. Yeah.
Thanks, Kathy. And yes, it is. I always think too, when we can't see visible change, like you're talking about, that long-term change in a short-term project can be such a challenge for us. Group 5, John James, would you like to share some of the challenges if you got to that question?
Yes, we did. Thanks, Jeanette. So the first challenge that we talked about was giving the farmers recognition for what they've already done well. And then we moved on, talked about challenging people in a respectful way about their, misperceptions about things, just a bit tricky. And then finally, we talked about explaining what they can do on farm affects the reef, and bringing it back to the community level and focusing on how it can benefit on farm efficiency, etc.
Great. Thanks for that, John. Quick summary. Great. I think I pick up on the respectful challenge. I think it's a real skill that we need to develop to be able to have some of those challenging conversations and building that trust first. So, yeah, really good point to pick up on. Thanks for that, John. And Ellie McVeigh, you're in room 7. If you were the facilitator in that room, are you happy to share, Ellie, what your group talked about? Have we still got Ellie, and have you put yourself off mute?
This is Amelia here. Ellie was in our room, but she dropped out, so I'm not sure what was going on there. So there was only 3 of us in there, and some phone number that we didn't know who was and didn't say anything. So it was a little bit odd. And one of our people had no internet connection as well. So I'm going to switch my headphones. I think need new batteries. So I'll just switch to that. So yeah, we were talking about some of our more immediate challenges with COVID and how that's restricted people from getting out there with growers. For us in Banana Land, we've gotten back to visiting growers and doing that small group work. So things are slowly returning to normal for us. That was good.
Great. Thanks, Amelia. Yes, and COVID has provided a few interesting challenges for us. One of the things that I've enjoyed about it is the fact that we have, I've seen a lot more producers and growers be prepared to get on Zoom and give it a try. So instead of having to try and, get people together, they're, more open to using this technology. However, Amelia, as you experienced, we do have our challenges with it, with people on phones not necessarily connecting in well and people dropping out with the service not being as good as it should be. So thanks for sharing those challenges, everybody. Diana, if you can share your screen, we'll go on to the next 2 questions, and this time we'll give you a bit more time in your breakout rooms. We'll give you up to 20 minutes to have a chat about those 3 questions. Okay, so this time our questions. So last time we were thinking about what's working currently well and what our challenges are at the moment. I will be going on to the other groups because we can't go to all the groups or we'll be here all day. So I'll be asking groups 8, 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 to report back on the next questions. So when we think about communicating science and we're thinking about moving into the future here, what would make the communication more effective for you? And what other communication tools do you need? Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you that having a bit more time was helpful and you had a bit more time to have a chat. Good. Thanks, Jean. Got the thumbs up. Excellent. We've still got people popping back in. I think we might all be back now. Excellent. Great. So I look forward to hearing what some of you have talked about. So like I did last time, I'll call on someone from one of the 3 of the rooms to answer question 3, and then we'll move on to question 4 before wrapping up our day. So group 8, we're up to Dave Clancy. Dave, can you give us an update on what you talked about, please, in your room for the first question?
Yep, sure thing. So the question was, what would make the communication more effective? So we've got a few points here. More local information, and that's not just water quality data, but data on productivity outcomes and responses to practice change. So a bit more information on those in the local area. Also more one-on-one extension from trusted organisations and trusted people. So I think a few people felt that, yeah, just being out there and having a simple conversation with people can really bring about a better understanding to growers and more likely to result in practice change. Also consistent, so on all scales, districts, regions, and larger, there's a need to be consistent when forming messages that we're going to be sharing about different topics, and linking extension providers and extension deliveries within all those areas. We also had thoughts that small groups have better outcomes, and also careful use of language and things like surveys and other communication material, not to be condescending and to acknowledge the skills and knowledge that farmers already have.
Great.
So, yeah, analyse. So maybe a bit more analysis on what a survey should look like. And then some people also thought that surveys were not always that valuable to growers. So yeah, that was what we did for question 3.
Great, thanks, Dave. And I think I hear all the time about the importance of local. So how can we have it in our backyard so we can really see the impact for us rather than it being somewhere else that we have. As much as it's good to get farmers out of their patch, they also really like that local one-on-one stuff. Thanks for that, Dave. Billy, your group.
Hello. We had a really good group of very experienced extension staff. So what we talked about is something that has already been mentioned around common messaging, but both across industry and different organisations that are involved in this space is really useful. The project link, so it's that whole, we talk about often the funding cycles. They are really short, but it's also understanding kind of what is really achievable in those timeframes. So setting up those objectives right at the front end would be a lot more helpful. Obviously, local extension staff that have existing relationships makes communication a lot more effective as well. Having scientists deliver some of the messages straight to farmers or to end users, something that we haven't done a lot of in the past or terribly well. So it is slowly changing, but that's something that will be really useful to do more of. Then what we talked about was having farmer champions, obviously, and it's a fairly common thing, but having those people that are actually involved in trials and talk about their experiences and their achievements, it's something that wins a lot of people over as well. It's one thing to talk about things that other people have done, but if you've experienced it on your skin, it's quite a different story. And mentoring groups, so having mentoring groups is really useful as well. For just more learning, I guess, and greater communication outcomes.
Great, thanks, Billy. Some really good ideas there from your group too. Our last group on that question, I'll ask Rhonda's group. Rhonda, were you the facilitator?
Mika actually did most of the work for that one, so I'll let him run with that if that's okay.
Yeah,
I'll take it. So we kind of built on what the challenges were. So we took the challenges and then said, hey, what are we going to do to make these things a bit different? So one of the main challenges that we came with was having data that's relevant, but then also having skepticism of data. So if people are involved in developing the data, it's difficult to be skeptical of it. So having growers or graziers involved in the data collection process and then the analysis process, or not so much the analysis, but making conclusions from that data is going to prevent skepticism because they're involved with it. So having interactions with small groups, so getting back to that one-on-one kind of situation. So if we can't have that, instead of having larger groups, having smaller groups and having greater presenter audience interaction. So if you are running, if you're an expert running a workshop or something like that, bringing the group sizes smaller and having more audience interaction is going to have a better outcome. So also just listening to the people on the ground and trying to see it from their perspective is a really important thing to remember as well. So that was pretty well. We also had a few more things. Keeping communication concise. A lot of growers are very busy people. They're running businesses, like we've all said already. Their time's very valuable, and keeping that communication concise and relevant is extremely important. So giving them the data to draw conclusions from as well. So presenting data without giving them the conclusions, and then explaining what some things mean so they can develop those conclusions themselves, I think is really important. So they were the main things we came up with for that question.
Great, excellent. Some really good ideas there. So important to get them involved in the process so they've got ownership and drawing their own conclusions and thinking it through. You get so much better practice change. So excellent ideas there. Now we'll go to question 4, and which was around what other tools and resources do we need? And I'll ask group 11, Jason, if you could please report back on the conversation in your group.
Yeah, just want to thank Group 11. Awesome bunch of people that really put some serious thought into what they were discussing. So what are the communication tools that we need to better effectively communicate the science? Julianne came from a grazing point of view, and she did some land tool assessment training that she thought was really good. And it's a tool to observe for growers or farmers to observe their country and do local assessments. And so it's more of an interactive tool that the landholders can be more in tune with their landscape and observe changes in real time. So yeah, that was a really good point. People learn in different ways, so there's a lot of tools out there, but if we could structure the tools or combine them that act in a journey going forward. So if you start with compaction and you use a penetrometer and you are out there with the grower and you progress in a journey of measuring and suggesting improvements, that could be a really good tool going forward. Peer-to-peer learning and engaging with other networks. Sometimes we get caught in our own little bubble, and it's not until you look outside, for relevance. If I look outside the sugar industry and look at what GRDC are doing or the cotton industry are doing, maybe you can pick up some really good pointers that come with interacting with other networks. Use the tools we have more effectively. As we said before, there are a lot of tools out there, but one of the best tools that was highlighted was incentives. Incentives are a magnificent tool. There are growers out there that want to change but are financially constrained. Professional support available to the industry. Like I'm really good at playing with dirt and talking to plants, but media and comms aren't really my specialty. So if there was a media and comms teams that were available to make our messages look better, then that would be appreciated. And the final point is acknowledge the history and how far growers have come already. Agriculture is constantly evolving, and growers, have done a really good job in where we were 50 years ago to where we are today. So, having that positive reinforcement might help improve motivations and ownership going forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. Sounds like some good discussion in your group. And I'll also highlight, while it's great to look outside your industry, it's good to also have a look across the ditch and have a look at some of the work that they're doing in New Zealand. So there's a group I've been working with over there called the Red Meat Profit Partnership. And they've done some really good work on peer-to-peer learning. So if anyone's interested in that, certainly let me know and I can send you some more information. So thank you for that. Now our last group is Niall or Carla, who was the facilitator in that group for us.
We had a few. We had a group of facilitators we ended up with, so that was interesting. Do you want Carla, or do you want me to talk to it, or?
You can talk to it, Niall. It's okay.
Thanks for that. I thought you'd say that. When I asked the question, I
You
knew
took
the
the
answer.
notes.
So, okay, so we were talking about the tools. One thing we're actually, and project Carla's working on that we've supported, is bringing in tools like the walk in the landscape and catchment stories. So tools that actually put the farm into the catchment or the broader landscape system and talk to some of those sort of physical and biophysical processes, not just sort of saying this is the impact of water quality. It's actually talking about the process of how materials move through the catchment. And linked to that was tools like maps and satellite pictures or drone aerial footage overlaid with some of the relevant spatial data of drainage and ground cover and where the crops are grown, things like that. And that almost, the landholders often, I know when we've done that, you put a big aerial photo, they can't help themselves to start to talk about it. So it's a really good icebreaker. You start to talk about the landscape and the process that are happening there, and then you can lead into all sorts of conversations of how things are working. So that's really good. And then Ellie mentioned also sort of time lapse and historical photos. So they're the same thing. If you get some of those historical photos of, might be gullies and how they've grown over time, or it could be how, land use has changed over time in a catchment, that again gets the conversation going, and it can kind of lead you to some really useful sort of conversations about how, some of the impacts maybe, but also what things can be done to improve it, and gets people enthusiastic about making a bit of a change. And sometimes, even you can leave some of that material there as a bit of a gift, and people appreciate it. They like to have photos of their properties and things like that. The other thing that came up for tools was some of the manuals and guides are often really crucial. So some of often the hard sort of printed material, but like John Day and those have got gully manuals, and there's also guidebooks for weeds and things like that. Always handy to have on hand to again get the conversations, and you can kind of discuss what a weed is and work out the ID for it or things like that with a landholder and get them involved. We then talked about, some of those now have been produced as apps and sort of internet services and things like that. So they are useful, and they are actually, some are really tricky how those apps work, but there are still technical difficulties around those, and some of the internet services create a few constraints. So they're good, but maybe, and there's a bit of time there to use them. Carla then talked about having some of the information, so monitoring data in an accessible place in one place. So that sort of would go with that. So there are some web systems and maybe apps that can display some of the data to talk through. And I think the Wet Tropics MIPS is doing some of this at the water quality monitoring. So they're useful tools. So you can actually really talk about data, and if it's real-time data is good. I've experienced a bit of that where there's a lot of cost to maintain those systems, and seen in some of the hydrological monitoring that actually some of those costs then have to be, they take services out of other parts of the system, so gauging systems and things like that. So you've got to work out the balance there. The other sort of going back to more of the traditional tools is, more shed meetings and farm demo sites, and not forgetting, when you think about tools, that real, that people, and be able to, read people and read the room and stuff like that. And you can get those stories going amongst people, make it much more personal and a bit of emotion in it. So, it's probably, we do a fair bit of that, but there's probably, could be more would be useful. And then we thought, well, because of COVID, that's been a bit of a restriction. So the web tools, obviously, like we're using today, the Zoom meetings and things like that, and they're definitely useful, but there's certain people struggle with them. So it's not maybe for everybody at this stage, but it's growing in popularity pretty quickly. And sometimes it actually makes the messaging really clear. So it can be actually really good. And then also another one that I mentioned was we've got a lot of small projects where we've supported bus tours and things like that. So it's a bit of a tool where it mixes some of the social interaction with the practical demonstrations, and people have time to sort of sit in a bus and talk about things amongst themselves. So there's some of the things we came up with. So that's about it. I don't know if Carla or Ellie want to add to that.
No, that you captured that very well, Niall.
Great. Thanks, Niall. Some good suggestions and thoughts there. So I'd really like to thank all of our facilitators today. And if you can please send your Word documents, your notes through to Diana so that we can get that out to everybody as a bit of a summary, that would be great. So Carolyn, I'd like to hand over to you to give a bit of an overview and a thank you, and then we'll wrap up our session.
Thanks, everyone. Just very conscious that we are just over time, so I'll keep it really short and sweet. I'd just like to thank everyone again for attending, for contributing, for giving us your insights, and also thank QFF for organising this. Hopefully you've found the discussions really interesting and have learned some insights that you can take back to your organisations or use yourself. we will obviously be thinking about how we can perhaps address some of the desires out there, and also we'll I'm very, very conscious that a lot of what I heard today also has impacts in that broader policy context, you know, particularly around timing and funding cycles and all of that. So we will be forwarding your thoughts, your comments back across our organisations. We'll obviously send some stuff out after the event, and if anyone has any questions for Ellie or me or anyone else, please just shoot them through. But yeah, thanks everyone. I really, really appreciated hearing your insights. You're on mute, Jeanette.
Thanks, Carolyn. Diana, if you can share your screen again for us, please. We have a link to a SurveyMonkey, which Diana has put in the chat box, and she will also pop that up on the screen in a moment. So really appreciate your feedback. Obviously, learning how to use all of these tools like Zoom a lot better through COVID has given us opportunities to be able to do more of this. So anything that you can help us with and to do it better, we always appreciate hearing from you. So thanks everybody for your time today. My apologies that we went over. We gave you all a bit more time in the breakout room and went over. So thank you to all the presenters. Thank you to everyone for your time, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Can you see the SurveyMonkey code bar? People can just, with their phones, just take a picture of it and go into the survey. It will take you 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Diana. So take a picture of the screen and it'll take you into the survey. And Diana will also send out an email with that. So thank you all. Thank everybody. Thank you for your for the facilitators and for your contribution.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.